I never believed in moments that could stop time, until the one she walked into. She moved through the room as if she belonged everywhere and nowhere at once. The kind of presence that makes a quiet place feel full, as though the air itself leans closer to watch her. She wore a soft, cashmere sweater, pale blue, sleeves pushed to her elbows, and jeans that fit without trying. But it wasn't the clothes, it was the way her fingers lingered on the edge of the table as she leaned forward, eyes scanning the shelves, brows ever so slightly furrowed. Graceful, confident, but something unspoken flickered behind her gaze, a subtle fragility I didn't expect. I sat across from her, hands wrapped around my coffee cup longer than necessary, heart oddly aware of each inhale. I couldn't stop noticing the way her hand brushed the rim of the cup next to mine, almost accidentally, but enough that the warmth of her skin pressed against mine for a second too long. A flutter ran through me I didn't understand. My own fingers itched to linger there, to trace that curve of light across the wood. She glanced up, and our eyes met. Something in her look made me stumble inside, like I'd been caught somewhere I'd never meant to go. The world around us dimmed, a background hum that could have been a distant storm or just the quiet of the room. Every small motion, how her lips parted as she considered a book, how she tucked a stray strand of hair behind her ear, felt magnified, intimate, as though I were allowed a secret view no one else could have. "I didn't see you there," she said, voice soft, with a hint of amusement that didn't quite mask curiosity. You weren't hiding," I murmured, and the words sounded wrong. Too loud, too clumsy, but I didn't have another way to confess how aware I was of her presence. She tilted her head slightly, an almost imperceptible smile brushing her lips, and I swear I felt it across the table. Our knees brushed under the wood, accidental but electric. I tensed, then relaxed, then tensed again. Each heartbeat felt like it was trying to speak before I could, a slow drum only she could hear. The scent of her, soft lavender, faint vanilla, hovered near me. I wanted to lean closer, wanted to inhale it properly, but I froze. Instead, I let my gaze trace the lines of her face, the small crease at the corner of her eye when she smiled, the gentle curve of her jaw, the way she seemed both impossibly present and just out of reach at the same time. "Do you come here often?" I asked, ridiculous, though the words tumbled out anyway. She didn't answer immediately. She just looked at me, that same unreadable gaze that felt like a question and a confession rolled into one. Something in that silence wrapped around me tighter than a blanket. I wanted to speak, to say something clever, to reach across the space between us, but I couldn't. Not yet. Not without losing the fragile tension that made every second feel heavier, warmer, more urgent. And then, the door creaked open behind her. A harsh, sudden sound, breaking the bubble we'd built. Her eyes flicked toward it, brows knitting just slightly, and I realized my pulse was louder than the interruption itself. But even with the noise, the fleeting intrusion, I couldn't look away from her. Not now. Not ever that I'd always thought I knew what longing felt like, until her. And even then, I tried to pretend otherwise. It wasn't just the thrill of noticing her every movement, it was the quiet pull in my chest that tightened whenever she leaned a fraction too close, laughed at something only half funny, or let her hand brush mine accidentally. I told myself it was harmless. I told myself I'd survive it. She, too, carried something behind her eyes, a subtle hesitation, like she'd been here before with someone who left too quickly. There was a grace in the way she held herself, but also a fragility, a quiet loneliness I couldn't ignore. I guessed it came from years of doing everything on her own, from holding back because people expected her to be invulnerable. And maybe, just maybe, she saw the same in me, someone younger, earnest, untested, who might actually listen without judgment. We spoke in short sentences, careful laughter masking the curiosity in our voices. And yet, the room between us shrank in ways neither of us claimed. When she handed me a pen, our fingers brushed, lingering far longer than the task required. I wanted to look away, wanted to pull back, but the warmth of her skin rooted me in place. My pulse betrayed me, I felt it thrum in my throat and wrists, a quiet rhythm only she seemed aware of. "I shouldn't," she started, hesitated, then laughed softly, the sound curling around the space between us like smoke. "We're too different, maybe." I didn't need her to explain. I understood. She was older, experienced in ways I was only beginning to grasp. There was the unspoken risk, the social perception, the subtle judgment hovering outside our little bubble. I was younger, maybe too naive, and the world would probably never forgive curiosity this intense. But inside, I couldn't stop noticing. Not her hands, the scent of her hair, the way her eyes lingered on me like she was trying to read every unspoken thought before I even knew them. I had my own secrets. Nights spent replaying awkward encounters, the ones that left me second-guessing my own worth, the loneliness of being too young to truly belong anywhere. Somehow, she made it easier to feel seen without having to explain. I wanted to tell her all of it, every insecurity, every hesitation, but I didn't. Not yet. Instead, we circled each other like magnets, tentative touches sparking electricity neither of us named. She leaned over to point at a notebook, and her breath brushed my cheek. I froze, not out of fear, but because every instinct screamed at me to lean into it, to close the tiny gap and see what might happen if I finally stopped resisting. She pulled back, ever so slightly, her eyes meeting mine with that same unreadable tension, a silent acknowledgement of what simmered between us. A flicker of a smile, half shy, half knowing, made my chest tighten in a way I'd never expected. And then, just before the moment dissolved, her hand touched mine, brief, feather-light, but unmistakable. The connection lingered longer than necessary. A single spark, enough to remind us both that this was only the beginning. The afternoon sunlight slanted through the blinds, painting stripes across the table where we sat. I noticed every detail, how her hair caught the light, how the shadow of her eyelashes flickered against her cheek. She didn't seem aware, but I was. Always aware. I reached for a book she had left open, my fingers brushing hers again. The spark of contact made me pull back too quickly, and I caught the faintest curve of amusement on her lips. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Silence between us was enough to hold every word we weren't saying. Then, my phone buzzed. A message from a friend, innocuous enough, but the vibration on the table felt like an alarm. She glanced at it too, our hands nearly touching as I picked it up. My thumb lingered over the screen longer than necessary, and I noticed her eyes, sharp, questioning, hesitant. "Did you want to read that?" she asked softly, voice low. Her proximity was overwhelming, the scent of her, the warmth radiating from her body, made it impossible to focus on anything else. I shook my head, fumbling for words I didn't have. "No, it's nothing," I said. She leaned closer, almost imperceptibly, and for a moment, our faces were inches apart. The world shrank until the only reality was the heat of her breath against my cheek, the tension between us that neither dared name. I wanted to close the gap, wanted to feel the brush of her lips, but something held me back, a knot of hesitation, guilt, the quiet awareness of how complicated this was. Her fingers rested on the edge of the book, and she let them drift closer to mine. I swallowed hard, pulse thundering. The temptation to let go of reason, to let her know exactly how I felt, was almost unbearable. We were silent, communicating in tiny gestures, a tilt of her head, a quick intake of breath, a flicker of a smile. The room felt smaller, every sound amplified, the clock ticking, her chair creaking, our hearts beating in tandem without anyone noticing. And then, a knock at the door. My stomach plummeted. A coworker? A friend? Anyone. Anything to shatter the fragile bubble we'd built. Her eyes widened, and she leaned back just slightly, breaking the invisible boundary between us, but only barely. I wanted to apologize, to explain, but the words caught in my throat. Instead, I simply looked at her. She met my gaze, the tiniest smirk playing on her lips, as if to say, "We're not done." And in that unspoken exchange, something shifted. The near kiss, the stolen glances, the hesitant touches, they were no longer just fleeting. The tension that had been simmering beneath polite conversation boiled closer to the surface. I could feel her breath, the warmth of her hand near mine, the quiet pull of her presence against every restraint I tried to maintain. We didn't speak. We didn't need to. We just stayed there, pulled closer than ever, hearts racing, trapped in a moment that neither of us could, or wanted to, escape. The rain had started outside, soft at first, then heavier, drumming against the windows. We didn't notice. We couldn't. She was sitting closer now, knees nearly touching mine under the table, shoulders brushing. I felt the warmth of her body like it had been missing from me all my life. My hand hovered near hers, trembling slightly, unsure whether to reach or retreat. Every instinct screamed at me, but a quiet hesitation held me back, a question of boundaries, of what was allowed, what was dangerous, what could never be undone. I shouldn't be feeling this, she whispered, almost to herself, almost lost in the rhythm of the rain. Her voice carried a tremor I hadn't heard before, a vulnerability that cut straight through me. I wanted to tell her the same thing, but even saying it out loud felt impossible. Instead, I reached out, brushing a loose strand of hair from her face. Her eyes closed for a fraction of a second, leaning into the touch, and my chest ached. The room felt smaller, the air thicker, scented with rain and her subtle perfume, every sense screaming that this moment was too close to ignore. "You don't have to say it," I murmured, voice low, as if speaking any louder might shatter the fragile tension. "I already know." Her eyes opened, wide, searching mine, and I saw it there, the conflict, the desire, the fear. I had never witnessed such a complicated storm in a single gaze, and it stole my breath. My fingers itched to take hers, to close the distance entirely, but my mind fought the impulse. Social rules, age, perception, everything whispered that this was wrong. And yet, nothing else mattered. Her hand shifted, resting on the edge of mine, almost touching. The contact was minimal, but it sent sparks racing up my arm, through my chest, igniting something I couldn't name. Her lips parted slightly, as if she might speak, but no words came. She leaned in just a little, close enough that I could feel her breath, the faint warmth of her skin brushing against my cheek. She began, voice catching, then stopped. My own throat tightened. I wanted to say everything, to confess how long I had watched her, how every glance, every brush of her hand, had carved itself into me. But I didn't. Instead, I stayed there, suspended, feeling every heartbeat, every pull, every unspoken confession. The world outside had vanished. Rain, light, shadow, it didn't exist. There was only her, the press of her shoulder near mine, the quiet storm of desire that neither of us could fully name. And then she leaned a fraction closer, lips almost brushing mine. Time slowed, breaths mingling, the universe narrowing to this impossible, fleeting edge. The door creaked. We froze. The moment shattered and hung in the air, electrified and unfinished, leaving both of us trembling on the brink of everything we'd been resisting. The cafe was nearly empty, the quiet hum of conversation and clinking cups surrounding us like a fragile shield. I thought we were alone, safe in the little bubble we'd built, until I saw the way her eyes darted toward the corner. I need to tell you something," she said, voice barely above a whisper. Her hands fidgeted with the strap of her bag, curling and uncurling like she was trying to hold herself together. I noticed the slight tremor in her fingers, subtle, but it sent a ripple through me I couldn't ignore. "What is it?" I asked, leaning closer without thinking. My heartbeat thudded in my ears, loud enough that I was sure she could hear it. She swallowed. "Someone saw us last week. A friend, they might have told someone else. I don't know how much they know." The words hit me like cold rain. My stomach twisted, part of me thrilled by the thought that our closeness had been noticed, another part panicked at the exposure. I wanted to take her hand, to reassure her, but I stopped myself, unsure whether my boldness would make things worse. Her gaze met mine, intense and searching. She stepped slightly closer, then backed away almost immediately, as if testing the space between us. The movement was tiny, but electric. I could feel her breath, subtle warmth brushing past my cheek, the faint scent of her perfume, lavender and something sweet, making it impossible to think straight. "I've been trying to fight it," she admitted, voice trembling now, "but I can't. Not when you're here, not when it feels like everything else disappears." Her confession lingered in the air, heavy, unspoken in its implications. My chest tightened. I wanted to pull her into my arms, wanted to let the world fall away, wanted to hear her say my name in the quiet of the cafe. Instead, I stayed still, letting the tension stretch between us, savoring the ache of wanting and fearing all at once. She shifted again, closer, so that our knees brushed under the table. The contact was almost accidental, but my pulse spiked anyway. Her eyes flicked down to our hands and back up at me, a silent question, a dare, a promise I wasn't ready to name. I shouldn't, she murmured, voice low, almost lost in the hum of the cafe. Her lips twitched like she was holding something back, and I ached to find out what. I know, I said, words inadequate for the storm building inside me. My fingers twitched, wanting to reach for her hand, her shoulder, anything that would close the space without crossing a line we couldn't undo. She exhaled slowly, a shiver running down her spine, and leaned in just a fraction. The nearness was unbearable, tempting, a delicate line between surrender and restraint. Every instinct I had screamed to close the gap, but every rule, every fear whispered to hold back. And yet, despite the risk, despite the revelation, despite the world outside our bubble, we didn't step apart. Not yet. I could feel her heartbeat through the thin fabric of her sleeve, and I knew, in that shared silence, that the choice had been made for us. The rest, everything that could happen next, was inevitable. The rain had stopped, leaving the streets outside glistening, reflective, like the world was holding its breath. Inside, the quiet of the room was thick, almost suffocating, every sound amplified, the faint hum of the heater, the creak of the chair she had just adjusted, the soft intake of my own breath. We were inches apart. I could feel the warmth radiating from her, smell the subtle scent of lavender that seemed to cling to her hair. My fingers itched to reach for her, to trace the line of her jaw, the curve of her shoulder, but I stayed frozen, as though hesitation could somehow contain the gravity of what was between us. I don't want to, she began, voice low, trembling, lose myself, or you. Her words hung in the air, fragile, vulnerable. I wanted to tell her that the risk didn't matter, that I'd wait for every unspoken second until she let go of fear, until she let me in. Instead, I whispered, barely audible, you don't have to lose anything. Not me. Not us. Her eyes searched mine, wide and uncertain, yet shimmering with the faintest trace of surrender. I leaned closer, the space between us shrinking until her breath brushed my cheek. Her hand hovered near mine, trembling, almost touching, and I felt the pull stronger than anything I'd experienced before. The room seemed to shrink, the world outside fading to gray shadows, leaving only the two of us suspended in a heartbeat. Every instinct screamed to close the gap, to give in to the tension that had been building for weeks, months, years, even if it was just a few fleeting minutes. I've wanted this, I murmured, voice low, shaking slightly, for longer than I should admit. Her lips parted, her own confession hanging on the tip of the unsaid. And then she leaned in, just enough for our foreheads to touch. The warmth of her skin pressed against mine, the soft exhale of her breath mingling with my own. Our fingers finally brushed, tentative, feather-light, but charged enough to make every nerve hum with awareness. We paused there, suspended, neither fully surrendering nor pulling away. But in that silence, clarity settled. We understood each other, our fears, our desires, the gravity that had been holding us in tension. There was no going back, not really, not after this moment of recognition. Her eyes closed for a fraction, and I felt her lean into me, trusting, tentative, and entirely human. The ache in my chest eased slightly, replaced with a warmth I hadn't realized I was missing. I'm here, she whispered, barely audible. And I'm not going anywhere, I replied. The decision was made, not through words, not fully, but through every brush of skin, every shared breath, every heartbeat acknowledging the one truth we couldn't deny: we belonged here, together, at least for now. And that was enough. The evening light had softened, spilling gold across the room as if it had been waiting for this moment. We sat side by side now, knees touching comfortably, a quiet intimacy that didn't need words. The tension that had held us taut for weeks had finally loosened, leaving only the gentle, steady rhythm of being together. Her hand found mine without hesitation. Fingers intertwined, a small but profound act that said everything we hadn't dared to speak. I turned slightly, so our shoulders pressed together, and she leaned her head against mine, warm and light. The weight of every fear, the age gap, the judgment of others, the uncertainty of the future, dissolved in that simple closeness. "I never thought I'd feel this safe," she murmured, voice soft, vulnerable, yet confident in its honesty. "You've always been safe," I whispered back, and realized how true it was. Not just physically, but emotionally. The walls we'd both built around ourselves were still there, but together, they felt less like barriers and more like something we could navigate. Her fingers traced patterns on the back of my hand, absent-minded but deliberate, and I found myself leaning in, pressing my forehead against hers. The contact was quiet, but the intimacy was everything, electric, grounding, perfect in its imperfection. A soft sigh escaped her, and I realized we were both holding our breath in the same way, waiting for nothing and everything at once. We didn't need to speak. The shared glances, the small smiles, the way her hand fit perfectly in mine, those gestures were enough to close every lingering question. We'd acknowledged the risk, embraced the desire, and decided, silently, that it was worth it. "I'm glad we didn't wait any longer," I said, and she laughed softly, a sound that vibrated through my chest and settled into a warmth that lingered long after. She tilted her head, brushing her lips briefly against my temple, a whisper of a kiss that carried years of hesitation, longing, and finally, permission. I held her tighter, letting the moment stretch into infinity, the kind of closeness that only comes when two people fully see each other and choose to stay. Outside, the world went on, streets bustling, voices carrying in the evening air, but inside, there was only us. Only this perfect, fragile, human connection. And for the first time in a long while, everything felt right. We stayed that way for a long time, fingers intertwined, foreheads touching, breathing together. A shared understanding, unspoken but complete, had formed between us, that despite the age gap, the risks, the doubts, we had found something rare and unshakable. Finally, I whispered, "I think this is the start of everything." Her smile pressed into mine, soft and certain, and we didn't argue, didn't question, didn't let anything intrude. We just stayed, together, letting the warmth of proximity speak for all the words we didn't need. Did you enjoy the story? What kind of stories would you like to hear next?